Hello everyone, welcome back to Morgan Hasn't Seen for Jane Austen on film and for what I think is the pinnacle of Jane Austen on film, Jeannine. And I say that having not watched all the Jane Austen on film things. Not even have we finished. It is a bold statement. Not even have we finished the series yet. We have a massive movie coming next week. But I say that because I feel like today's episode, that is also our special video podcast episode of the month, as nicely voted for by all the people on the app formerly known as Twitter. I'm very happy it is this movie, to be honest with you. And if you are watching on the It's Wonderful Podcast YouTube channel today, hello, of course. If you are listening on all major podcast platforms that you can find It's a Wonderful Podcast on, as usual, we do love you as well. Of course we do.
Yes.
But I am very happy that this movie won the poll this month.
Me too.
Because after watching it, I knew it was, well, for one, I knew it was your favourite of the ones from this series. So if there was going to be any from Morgan Hasn't Seen that won, as opposed to our Hitchcock series that we're doing over on the main show, I would have wanted it to be this anyway. But after having watched it, this is everything I thought a Jane Austen movie was.
Okay.
In every possible way.
Yeah.
This is everything I thought a Jane Austen story was, and certainly this is what this kind of movie, I believe, should look like, should feel like, should be acted like. Every little element of this, I really just thoroughly enjoyed what was going on. I think there's a wonderful lightness to the heaviness of these kind of stories, of this story.
Yeah.
It's not like, I think Mansfield Park, to begin with, this series, felt like it dealt with kind of heavy topics at times.
Yeah.
And maybe it wasn't phenomenally done. I thought it was an enjoyable movie, but maybe it didn't quite have as much scale, as much grandness going on that even Emma last week did. And Emma last week, I think, very much was a rom-com.
Yeah.
A Regency set rom-com.
It stayed pretty
very
light.
much a rom-com.
Yeah.
Very, very light. Sense and Sensibility has such a great mix of both. I think it keeps its heavy elements light, but has its lighter elements feel weighty as well.
Yeah.
Because of maybe it is just the fact, and I think this is true as well, we have scaled up in terms of the quality of cast in these ensemble movies.
Yes, I mean, this
and
has
the amount of Harry Potter alumni we have here
in this one,
absolutely incredible.
I don't think I noticed it really until this watch. Like, I've seen this movie many a time, but I don't think I thought about it until this watch. And totally what you're saying about this one feeling like everything you expected to see in a Jane Austen film. We have our large recognizable cast. We have multiple romantic plot lines. We have class issues. We have our not quote unquote villains, but kind of veiled antagonistic characters.
It's almost like the rascals, the vagabonds, more than anything else.
But even like, the Fanny character being a bit of an antagonist.
Definitely.
In terms of really playing up the class issue. And of course your misunderstandings that kind of cause are coupling these issues in them ultimately getting together. And we do get a bit of comedic aspects with the actors that we have in here as well. So I think it has a little bit of everything. It definitely balances the tones because, yes, as you said, Mansfield Park really got dark in some of its issues. Emma stayed incredibly light, and this one has a great balance of both, with the darker aspects focusing on real emotion, real relatable emotion from these characters. And I think I really kind of got the title to the most in this watch, in terms of the two sisters and them kind of being those two sides of those words.
Yes, because it's a thematic title. Those
Yeah.
themes are played constantly
Yeah.
throughout the movie. That any sort of strife that occurs between the two of them, and they are loving sisters, our two
Yeah.
leads, they
Yeah.
definitely are. But any sort of disagreement that occurs between the two of them is because one has sense and one has sensibility. It is
Yes.
literally that kind of
One
simple. And the
Yeah.
the the idea of sense and sensibility is more along the lines of keep things to yourself or tell everyone your issues
Yeah,
almost,
tell
isn't it?
everyone everything you're feeling or kind of hide your emotions back. And it's a really interesting dynamic that the sister who shares everything gets frustrated with the one who doesn't share everything.
Yeah.
It's kind of a sisterly dynamic that I don't think is really often explored. Um, in terms of that kind of dynamic. So I like that, Kate Winslet character is constantly getting mad that her sister just
Yeah.
won't say how she's feeling. Yeah.
It feels like as well, it felt like every bit of conflict felt so personal. And it
Yeah.
was while being a large scale, I think probably the biggest scale movie we've got in these three, to
Mhm.
be honest with you, because probably simply the amount of important characters that are in this movie and the multiple kind of locations of country estate and then going to live on this cottage in somebody
Yeah.
else's country estate and then going visiting London, and it's all very, you know, it's
Yeah.
these multiple grand locations and you get a wider cast.
Yeah.
Yet every bit of issue feels so intimate. Every bit of romantic, unspoken kind of longing, or and don't get me wrong as well. This is another reason why I think it is just everything I expected from Jane Austen, everything I would want from
Yeah.
Jane Austen. Every little facet of this movie has something to do with somebody loving somebody else.
Yeah.
Everything.
Mhm.
Even the crux of the plot at the beginning of the movie and why they are forced to give up, well, not
Their
give up, I
home.
suppose, but why they are forced out of their home
Mhm.
is because, you know, they they were their
Second
mother
family, essentially.
was the second
Second
family. So
family of
even
this
that,
man. Yeah.
yes, a much more eloquent way of putting it.
Yeah.
Even that has something to do with love because it's Tom Wilkinson who plays Mr. Dashwood at the beginning of the movie who
Yes.
dies,
Yeah.
and they wouldn't even factor into this movie at all, factor into this story at all, if it wasn't for the fact that he knew this whole inheritance issue because it was,
Yeah.
written there.
Written in
There,
a
that is
way.
what it is.
Yeah,
That
written
that
in a
is what
way.
happens.
Yeah, written in a way that he couldn't provide for his second family. He had a son with his previous marriage. That wife most likely died. He remarried,
Yeah,
had 3 daughters, and that was
yeah,
his family, and they had an estate with him and everything, but now that he's on his deathbed, he's forced to leave everything to his son from his previous marriage, and
yeah.
has begged that son on his deathbed to take care of his family.
But just think about that. That is a law that he would have known, being
Yeah.
a part of nobility, being a part
Mhm.
of landed gentry, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
whatever it should be called at this point. I'm
Yeah.
going to keep using nobility because that just kind of makes
Yeah.
more sense. Even though it's probably not noble, it's probably just middling aristocracy or lower aristocracy.
Yeah.
Country estate folk.
Yeah.
He knew that law was in place, yet he fell in love again anyway.
Yeah.
And he did love his second family,
Yeah.
clearly, because he cared enough to really hammer the point home in the first minute of the movie.
Yes, to his son, "Take care of my wife and my children." your
Yeah.
sisters. Yeah.
So that crux starts from love, and
Yeah.
every little bit of the rest of the
Briefly.
movie
Yeah.
is to do with love. It is ingrained into Sense and Sensibility in a way that it wasn't even ingrained into Emma this much,
Yeah.
because there was elements of Emma that were just Emma being mean to people.
Emma thinking she knew best about everything, essentially.
And Emma thinking she knew best
Yeah.
about everything, some of which didn't have to do with love. Every little element of Sense and Sensibility is to do with love, and I love that about it.
Yeah.
Because what is a more personal emotion? What is an emotion that brings out the most nuanced kind of way of feeling, the most
Yeah.
nuanced choices that you can make in your life? And when everything's thrown at you, how do you hold on
Yeah.
to this one little element with all these crazy little weird plot developments that go on that we'll
Happen.
obviously
Yeah.
get into?
Yeah.
Our two sisters hold on to who they want all the time. And Kate Winslet especially, it's very
Yeah.
early Kate Winslet role actually, this, isn't it? 1995.
Yeah.
I feel like, is it Heavenly Creatures, that Peter Jackson movie that she did like before this, and what else? I don't really know if there's
Yeah. I don't know
much of
what her
anything
early
else.
career really looks like. Yeah. This is kind of a
Up until
really,
Titanic, and
yeah.
what's the
This
one
is,
before? There's one before Titanic as well, in between 96-ish. But she's very young in this movie, and
yes.
wonderful, obviously, as Kate Winslet has consistently been throughout the entire movie. But she stands by someone she loves, even when she's
Yes.
constantly told about all the terrible things he's done.
Yeah.
But then has to come to realise that the, I suppose, true love in the sense that happens is a more stable form of love for her, is a form of love where you can see love back,
Yes.
and that comes in another form, doesn't it? In an odd way that I just laugh at because of who it is, but simply because there is
Unexpected.
the amount.
Yeah.
It's a bit unexpected, but the amount of Harry Potter alumni in this movie, it just sold me from the word go.
Yeah.
I had such an enjoyable time watching this. I felt every little bit of emotions I feel
Yeah.
like it wanted me to feel. I felt so connected to these characters. I felt connected to some of the supporting players as well.
Yeah.
That probably has something to do with the fact that they're recognizable actors, and I think I
Yeah.
said this last week in Emma as well. It helps in this sort of sense when you can
Yeah. You have a
recognize actors.
familiarity with them. Yeah. Yeah.
And I might have even said it in Mansfield Park, but I know it's your favourite. Stop me finally waffling.
Yes.
Why is this your favourite? I assume you just feel every bit of personality that is in this movie equally to how I do.
Yes, I love the emotionality in it, as somebody who has a sister, an older sister, who has kind of put herself in that role, who has felt like she's had to kind of step up and take care of the family and keep things together as opposed to kind of being hysterical. And so she doesn't really leave herself time to kind of process her feelings. I've seen that in my sister and me kind of just being this young, flighty, crush
Mm.
crazy kind of feeling
So
everything,
you're Kate
saying everything I
Winslet, you're
feel. A
Marianne.
little bit, yes, but as watching this film older, I do relate in a lot of ways to Eleanor and kind of this quiet pain because, like, what is the point of making a big fuss about it, kind of thing. So I understand, I felt that perspective, but I do kind of relate a lot of the dynamic between the two of them to me and my sister. Not that we ever talked about our romantic feelings together in that way,
Mm.
but just in general of one feeling like they had to kind of keep themselves composed and not really allowed themselves to express, while the other one had that freedom to just kind of be flighty and excited about
Yeah.
things and say everything they're feeling. Is what I
Okay.
kind of always relate to, and
I like
obviously really love the cast, love a very unexpected
yes.
romantic lead that you alluded to, um, and
One very expected romantic lead and one very
yes,
unexpected one.
unexpected, yes,
From the male
and
side, I think, yes.
yes, and I just love how the story plays out. Um, I love kind of the misunderstanding that brings this really interesting surprise, the build of these relationships,
Yeah.
are all really great, and even, like, the little comedic bits that are in there peppered in such perfect ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a slow burn romance.
yes,
It's the romance takes time
yeah,
in this movie and therefore feels much more genuine. Because I think we can be used to, especially, us, we're old movie people, we're used to
yeah.
pretty snappy romance stories,
Yes,
aren't we?
yeah, yes. So when
So,
you
so
get
the
something that
work, we love
builds and
them.
grows,
They're great.
yes. Mhm.
But this takes its time
Yeah,
and is all the better for it. Let's call it what it is as well. Yes, this has a great cast and a phenomenal ensemble, but it is Emma Thompson's movie. She
yeah,
wrote the movie. She adapted this
yeah,
novel
won an Oscar for it.
won an Oscar for adapting this novel. Um, I think a couple of years after she won her acting Oscar as well, she
Yeah,
won her Oscar for this. Um, I mean, she's phenomenal in the role as well. I think she was nominated for playing Eleanor, as well as
yeah,
obviously writing the movie,
yeah,
which she won for. It does not work without Emma Thompson being as talented as she is.
yeah,
And I've always been a great fan of Emma Thompson. And I think finally, having watched something like Sense and Sensibility,
yeah,
I'm seeing the peak of Emma Thompson
yeah,
and the top of the top of Emma Thompson, and not kind of the who who she'd become, I suppose, later on, which is maybe playing off some of the things she did so well in her earlier career,
yeah,
or being a little eccentric, or
yeah,
rather eccentric in her role in Harry Potter, isn't she? As
yes,
Trelawney.
yes.
I suppose we can rattle off a few there as well. Who else do we have? We've got Snape,
We
obviously. Alan Rickman's in
yes,
the movie.
we have, Madame Pomfrey, the nurse,
Madame Pomfrey,
plays their
Gemma
mother.
Jones is
Yes.
Mrs. Dashwood, the mother.
We have,
Um, Fudge, Cornelius
Miss
Fudge
Fudge.
is their uncle who
Yes.
allows them to stay on his
They yes,
property.
and I believe his mother-in-law that he kind of takes care of is, the original fat lady who was in the
That's
first
right.
film.
Yes,
Yeah.
Elizabeth Spriggs. You've got Imelda Staunton
Staunton, yeah,
Umbridge
Umbridge, yeah.
in here. Um, who else from Potter? There's somebody. I'm sure there's somebody else from Potter. Hugh Laurie's in the movie as well,
Yeah, he's
who
a
I find
great bit of comedic
hilarious.
yes.
He's so good.
Just the
He's
long-suffering husband of Imelda Staunton's character. She's just flighty and excited and all in the gossip, and he's just sat there reading his paper like, "Yes, like, just
he's
making snarky,
barely in it.
snide comments. Yeah.
He's so incredibly dry in
Yes.
the movie, and I really liked him when he did
Yeah.
show up. They're not in it for a great deal, are they? But
But they do bring a bit of
Alan
comic
Rick, yeah, Alan Rickman is obviously one of the romantic leads.
yes,
Essentially, he
and it
turns
works.
into it,
It
and
works
it
as
does
Colonel
work.
Brandon. And also I think Hugh Grant was originally going to play Gilderoy Lockhart, but I think it
That's
was a
right,
scheduling
he
thing,
was.
and so Emma's ex stepped in and filled the
Yeah,
role.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and you know what? As well, I give Hugh Grant his plaudits these days. I do. I was long ago turned around on Hugh Grant thanks to Morgan Hasn't Seen,
Yeah.
and I do enjoy Hugh Grant. I very much enjoyed him in Heretic last year. That
Okay. Yeah, mhm.
weird movie that he did. And yes, okay, this is very much typically what I thought Hugh Grant just was all the
He's
time.
like, nervous and
But he does it so well in
yes,
this.
yeah.
And he's so very endearing, I think, in this
Yes.
movie.
Especially in juxtaposition to the family he's in and his horrible sister Fanny, who's just always kind of
Yeah,
making underhanded comments to this poor family that she like has no qualms about taking everything from. And so the fact that he comes in to show this sympathetic side, and I love there's a great line that Eleanor says to him that like somebody being kind to you is hard for you to understand because of who your family is and how your
mm,
family treats people. So someone showing you grace is like a foreign concept for you to
yeah.
understand, basically. Yeah,
There's a lot of wonderful moments like that in the
yeah,
movie where
yeah.
people will very directly say something to somebody else and it will cause them to rethink their whole kind of personality. It's full of these really
Yeah.
intelligent kind of ways of
Yes.
thinking,
Yeah.
this movie, I think. Ways of thinking about family, ways of thinking about love, about honor,
Yeah.
about respectability and this kind of
Yeah.
thing. And I think it feels so it feels so like we're able to connect to this movie. I think a bit more than we did these past couple of
Mhm.
movies. Maybe because the our leads are dealt that blow at the beginning of the movie where they
So
are
we're
stripped of their high class status essentially. They are stripped of
yes.
their money. They are stripped of their way of life
Yeah.
simply through legality, through the
Yeah.
bureaucracy of death,
We're
you know?
immediately endeared to them, and Eleanor does kind of give this interesting has this interesting conversation with Hugh Grant's character when they're riding horses, and she talks about how, "I won't get anything because I'm a woman. I won't be able to,
Yeah.
it won't be as easy for me as it is for you," and kind of puts that perspective to him, so I like her having kind of this real conversation. I think how the characters see the world, um, and how they talk about things feels very modern as well. So I feel like that also
Yeah.
kind of maybe pulls us in a little bit more than the other films that felt very much of the time, whereas these
Yeah, but I think
characters
that can be
feel
I
very modern in a lot of ways.
I think there was elements to those other movies and those other stories and how those other characters behaved that did feel modern as well. I think particularly Mansfield Park, to be honest with you,
Yeah. Oh
more
yeah.
so than ever. Um, I think that might just be an Austen thing, and I think that's why Jane Austen is continually well read
Yeah.
and continually well respected, and goes on and on and on to be the novelist of all novelists, really,
Yeah.
isn't she? Because there is such a truly timeless quality about the
Her
feelings, the
heroines. Yeah.
dynamics, the
Yeah.
characters, the women that are in these stories.
Yeah.
And it's why so many people latch onto them and love them so dearly, I
Yeah.
think. And I think before we get into all the nitty gritty details of
Yes.
Sense and Sensibility and how exactly these two romances, two central romances, okay, there's a little bit of another funny little other
Yeah.
romances going on in the movie,
Yeah.
but we do have to say a big thank you to all our It's Wonderful podcast
Of
patrons
course.
today, Jeannine, don't we? As is
Yes.
something we always like to do on the show. We
Yeah.
will start by saying a big thank you to Adam Witt.
And thank you, Michael Smith.
Thank you to Abby Friel.
Thank you, Ferris Muthana.
Thank you to 90s Comics Box, Jannine's big brother Justin.
Thank you, Tina Farrow.
Thank you to Marcus Burton.
Thank you to Movie Fanobi Steve.
Thank you to Samir Tesfaye.
And thank you, Patrick Harden.
Thank you to Carla Feast.
And thank you to the great Ken Knapsack.
Thank you to Tom and Kimber of the Odd Shape channel.
And thank you, Eric Garcia.
And thank you, of course, to Billy Polahan. Yes.
Yay.
Applause for the patrons.
You can
Applause for
actually
the
see our
movie.
applause today.
You can, yes, there is the
We
applause
always
for the
do it,
patrons.
but no
We
one can
do.
ever see it.
We actually do, don't we? We actually
Yes.
always do a physical applause for the patrons.
Yes.
I feel like I sometimes treat every show like a video show, apart from maybe what I'm wearing or my general sense of appearance. But it's nice that we can actually do an applause for the patrons and it be seen to be an applause for the patrons and an applause for the movie, of course, that we always do as well. Because, well, we don't always necessarily do the applause for the movie. It does depend on what it is.
Yeah.
Here is one, obviously, already, he's quite clear in our conversation today, deserves a great deal of applause. I think it's time to get properly into this plot, though, Jeannine, because the Dashwoods, they don't spend too much longer, obviously, in their home, as it were, that is now fallen into the hands of that first son and his slightly horrible wife,
Fanny. Yes, and how we kind of get there, like the what happens in between them getting to that estate and his father dying. We see kind of Fanny's manipulation and her kind of messing with him to where it just makes the situation even worse for this family.
Yes, but obviously the Dashwoods are eventually forced properly out of that home and end up living with Cornelius Fudge and the fat lady. That's who they end up living with. On a little cottage on their property. But of course, before they are forced out, there's enough time for a visit from Hugh Grant.
Yes.
Who is the brother
of Fanny.
Of Fanny,
and the eldest son of their family. Yes. What really just sucks, what pisses me off about Fanny is, his father just kind of states to him on the deathbed, please provide for my family. They're only able to get 300 pounds, I think, a year or something like that.
It might be 500, but it's basically it's obviously nowhere near enough for
dowries and living and that. So he tells his son to take care of my family. And so when he kind of states this to his wife, he's like, okay, so, I'm going to give them 3,000 pounds. And I think that's fair. He didn't. And then Fanny's like, well, I don't think they need all of that. I mean, they probably have simple living and this and that. And so then he kind of like, well, yeah, maybe just 1,000. And then they don't need that much, and then, she kind of makes some snide comment or gives him a stare. And then he's like, well, maybe 500. And then he lowers it every time Fanny makes a little comment or gives him a little look, to the point where he's literally giving them next to nothing. Which is just so sucky. And then we kind of cut to the Dashwoods and we see the mother just, obviously very upset and talking about how she's now going to be reduced to being a guest in her own home, packing up her things. And Eleanor, we kind of see her position in the family of having to kind of keep it together. Marianne is playing sad, depressing music on the piano, which also just very much feels like me. Like, if I'm annoyed with someone, I make it incredibly clear that I'm annoyed with them.
You loudly play depressing music.
Or I just ignore them like Marion does, and makes it clear I'm just not happy they're there. Because we did have a family situation where there was someone who was in the mix that was very kind of not nice to the family. And so in their presence, I was very much ignoring them and just being like Marianne.
It becomes clearer and clearer why you love Sense and Sensibility so much.
So that spoke to me in a lot of ways. I'm petty like that. If you piss me off, I will make it clear in not so veiled ways. I think I got known for a stint in my Twitter days when Twitter was still Twitter, of being a subtweeter, just making it clear that I was annoyed with something.
You were.
Very petty in my own kind of indirect way. So all of this feeling of what's happening to this family just like really was pissing me off, and was like, I would totally
Mm,
be petty about it, and make these kind of snide comments like the mother makes and things like that when they
yeah,
get
I mean,
there.
there is some serious crying going on as well from Mrs. Dashwood, from
Yes,
Gemma Jones. It is
yes.
nasty, really.
Yes, and it speaks
Um,
to Eleanor, its position. It shows us that she kind
oh
of has
yeah,
to be the one with the sense to kind of keep the
yeah,
ship going, to, keep the composure, because her sister's kind of, making a big thing. Her mother's making a big thing. So I think it's a really interesting way to illustrate why she has to be the sensible one in most situations, and why there's no really room for her to express her feelings,
yeah.
because she has to keep it together, because the rest of the family's kind of falling apart. And then their
It's that
youngest
very
sister is constantly hiding everywhere as well.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. Because there is three Dashwood sisters, isn't there?
Yes. Yeah.
There is a very young one as well who must be like 11 or something like that,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
Who has kind of resigned herself to just hide under tables and up trees and things like that, and
Yeah.
just doesn't want really anything to do with anybody. Hugh Grant kind of coaxes her out to
Yeah.
what, at the kind of beginning of the movie, because of his natural affinity and charm that he has
Yes.
for people. But it's what makes Eleanor such a fascinating character, as you rightly said, is this sort of commendable attitude she has of,
Yeah.
I need to step up. But it's commendable to a point where you realize that it's actually, she shouldn't have to do this.
Yeah.
This should not be required. It's wrong that this is required,
Yeah.
and she's doing it anyway. Like, that is so admirable.
Mhm.
It's almost like, let me help you, Eleanor, let me help you, but I admire that you're able to do it,
Yeah.
because it's not nice that you're having to step up in this way to cut your emotions off,
Yeah.
essentially.
And keep the
Because
composure for the rest of your family, yeah.
keep the composure. Those emotions are dangerous. Those emotions are what causes the chaos that nobody in this family needs.
Yeah.
And how you kind of talk about that, because I've seen this in real life, it's such a tough situation when you're looking at somebody else who you can see does do that and is
Yeah.
like that for their family unit, and kind of all you want to do is help, but how much can you really?
Yeah.
What else is going on? Is it more a case of just, this needs open communication? And I think over the course of the movie, it becomes, or the story, I should say, it becomes very much a case of much more open communication between the Dashwoods generally,
Yeah.
that actually helps ease all of them in
Yeah.
their ways. Because yes, Emma Thompson, Eleanor, doesn't want to have to be composed all the time, doesn't want to have to, bottle stuff up and get on with it all
Yeah.
the time. But Marianne doesn't want to be as flighty and off the rails and kind of all over the place emotionally as she is. They need
Yeah.
to learn from each other, and they need to balance it
Yes.
out.
Yes, and Marion, for a while, kind of, she is always complaining that, Eleanor's not open enough. It's a
Yeah,
big source of frustration for her, because she wants someone to kind of gush back and forth about, those feelings, and, Eleanor just seems very kind of closed off to her, and she
yeah.
constantly kind of calls her out on it.
Pretty quickly, though, Eleanor develops a little bit of a bond with Hugh Grant,
Yes,
whose name is
because of the
Edward,
youngest.
we should
Yes,
say as well.
Edward Ferrars, because of the young sister. His sister Fanny is giving him a tour of the house, and they're in the library, and the sisters have been looking for this youngest sister for a while, And so he's in the library, his sister's giving him the tour, and he sees somebody pull a big atlas under the table, so he knows the little sister is there. And he kind of like tries to help hide her from
Mm.
Fanny as well. So after kind of the tour, he goes to Eleanor and says, "Hey, I think I found what you're looking for." And ultimately he kind of helps get the sister to come out, because they know she loves maps and atlases, so he pretends
Yeah.
that he doesn't know where some place is, and so she rightfully kind of corrects him, and that's kind of how this bond forms between the two of them. And we see him, Eleanor's watching him play with her outside, play swords, and he's kind
Yeah.
of like her horse, and that's and her kind of like pet kind of thing. So it's kind of the first we've seen this youngest sister actually express herself and come out, and it's all because of Edward. So then, on top of that, we see these really sweet moments of him and Eleanor talking and having these really deep, significant conversations and going on walks together. We see in private moments he defends the family to Fanny. Fanny's complaining about how Marion never talks to her and she's very rude. And Edward kind of tries to stop her cold and says, "They just lost their father, Fanny. Like, cut them up some slack." And then, like, Fanny pauses for 2 seconds, and you think,
Yeah.
"Okay, maybe she understands," and then she's like, "Well, that's no excuse." Like, she's the worst. So, we see
Yeah.
him
That's
understand
I
the
mean,
plight
that's
of
the
the family and be very different from his sister. So, we liked that.
we do. That
Yeah,
that is the important point, is that he does it all in private. He's not just endearing for show, he's
yeah,
endearing
because that's who he is. Yeah,
in reality.
yeah,
He's endearing as a very genuine way. Hugh Grant plays it very well.
yeah,
He really, really does. And it is where this slow romance builds with Eleanor as well. At least from Eleanor's point of view, it's not spoken. It's so unspoken, constantly unspoken, really,
yeah,
for the whole movie until it isn't again.
yeah,
But especially compared to Kate Winslet, to Marianne's romantic situations, two of them in the movie,
yeah.
that are basically the whole plot of the movie.
Yeah, it takes up a
For a
big
great
chunk.
for a great
Yeah,
period of time, because of how much we end up knowing about every little detail of it, because that's the nature of Marianne.
yes.
And Eleanor's left in the background going, Edward, Edward. Is Edward there?
Yes,
I hope
yes,
Edward's there. Maybe
yes,
Edward's there eventually. Is Edward
and
there? And it's kind of that, and you remember that, and you
yes,
feel that
and you
still.
kind of hold on to that, and you feel like, there is only kind of one big obstacle in the way, in the fact that, like, Fanny is noticing
Oh yeah,
this kind of endearment happening between these two people, and she doesn't like it, and she constantly is throwing these reminders out that their mother has these big plans for him to, do
mm.
business and things. But he's also privately shared with Eleanor that that's not what he wants to do. Like, he doesn't
No, he
wanna.
wants to be like a vicar in a small country parish, doesn't he?
Yes, he doesn't wanna do any kind of big business or law or anything like that. And so it's nice to see that he's comfortable enough to share that with her. But, even I think when, Eleanor's mother and Fanny are, like, watching them walk out the window, the mother's
Mm,
very excited, and she's like, "Oh, yes, Edward seems to have affections for Eleanor. It seems very nice, don't you think?" And then Fanny's bringing up, "Oh, well, no, my mother has these ambitions for him, da 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 da
yeah.
da," and, kind of just veiled like, "Oh, she wouldn't want him lowering himself," and that kind of thing. And obviously, the mother's very offended because, Fanny's
Yes.
just being very rude about it. So, she sets it up so that the mother kind of sends for him to go do business things so that he's
Yeah.
not there, because Fanny is clocking this is getting serious and we can't have that. So she
And he
finds
is
some
gone.
excuse
He's
to send
gone
him
for quite
away.
a bit of the movie. Yeah,
Yes.
he is gone for quite a
Yeah.
bit of the movie.
And the day that he's gonna leave, and I think that's the day that the family decides to kind of leave. Um, they just kind of are frustrated with the situation. They don't like being guests in their own home.
Yeah.
So they ultimately, that's when they do get the offer to move to the cottage and in the country. And so that's what they plan to do. So they announce it at dinner that they're gonna go
Yeah.
stay at the cottage. And the mother is
A very
very much
very warmly welcomed at the cottage.
yes, and they tell Edward, "We would love to have you. You're part of this
Yeah.
family." And so they extend a very warm welcome to Edward to come visit anytime that he would like, and he says, like, he would really love that. And he also, like, kind of shows a little bit of upset that they're leaving, you know?
He
Um,
does.
yes, and ultimately on top of that, um the mother does send for him to go do business things. So he comes to say goodbye to Eleanor as she's kind of in the stable saying, goodbye to the horses and things. And it's like he's going to tell her something important.
Mm,
And then here comes Fanny interrupting. Okay, you got time for you to go. Your mother's calling
yeah.
for you. Mother needs you, da da da, whatever. And so then he can't tell her anything. And that's the last we kind of see them together for the rest of for a good chunk of
Yeah,
the film.
very, very long
Just
time
kind
of
of
the movie,
left on
which
this button. Yeah.
and that those things are, I think, wonderful little scenes, though, where you know exactly what is going on inside, but
Yeah.
nobody ever is able to say
Able
anything.
to
For one
say,
reason or another, nobody
yes,
is able to ever actually say anything.
verbalize. Yeah.
And that is what Jane Austen is all about, I think,
Yes.
as well.
Yes, and it does end up
Um,
being something more than what we think it is.
oh, it does, yeah.
Because I think at this moment, I'm sure you were thinking, "Oh, he's probably was gonna propose or something." But Fanny interrupted, and then later we learn it's much more, complicated than
Yes,
that.
it's much more. It might result in the same thing, but it's far
Yeah,
more complicated.
yeah,
There is complexity to the romantic entanglements in this movie, as I
yeah.
think we're going to get onto now, because when
Yes.
we're at the cottage, having been very warmly welcomed by Cornelius Fudge and the Fat Lady, with all their dogs and everything,
Yeah.
like very, very heartily warm welcome. And I
Yes,
love
very
that.
excited, and there's very silly, gossipy kind of
They
people.
are. They
Yes.
really are. They love it, both of them.
Yeah,
They're dancing about the villages, and when they go to London, especially, and there's these larger balls and
yeah.
things that are happening. My God, they just want to be in everybody's ear, going
Yes,
about what's going on.
yes,
It's
and they're
all they want to do.
yes, and they're mercilessly teasing Eleanor because they hear this gossip of her, you know, being sweet on somebody, and then, of course, the little sister not knowing, the
Yeah,
propriety of situations, kind of teases that it's in fact true, and says
mm,
that his name starts with the letter F, or his last name, and so they're
yeah,
sat there trying to guess who this man is that she's interested in with the last name F. And Eleanor's just like trying to not be completely embarrassed, and Marianne's trying to tell the little sister like shut up kind of thing. And so it becomes this running thing, that they're constantly guessing. And then when the name Ferrers does come up, they look
mm,
at each other and like have this big explosion of laughter, and like nobody knows what they're laughing about except the Dashwoods, and it's this whole kind of embarrassing thing. So yes, they're very
yeah.
much animated people, that kind of bring a bit of comedy, and it's nice to see someone treat this family with love and warmth, because we've seen
Absolutely.
that first big chunk of Fanny, really just not treating them the best. So
Absolutely. I think it's important now to talk about Marianne's two romantic
yes,
partners, shall we say,
yes.
in the movie. One of whom is obviously uh, Colonel Brandon, Alan Rickman,
Yes, who is a good
in the movie.
friend of Cornelius Fudge and the fat
Yes,
lady. They were in, the war together, and, so he's, the single man with his own estate and everything, and
this I assume
he
is the Napoleonic Wars.
yes, and so he comes for a visit as Marianne is playing on the piano, and he walks in and hears her singing and is just kind of taken by her. And ultimately we see this kind of this crush that he develops on
Yes.
Marianne.
Now,
And
let's call it what it is. Alan Rickman's quite severely older than Kate Winslet.
yes,
And the characters are themselves. The characters are very much supposed to have this 20-year
like
gap or
age
whatever.
difference. Yes, and it like it
Maybe.
speaks to why Marianne might not be interested in him
Yeah.
immediately because of, his age. And even Cornelius Fudge is kind of pushing him because he notices it. Because obviously him and Fat Lady are super gossipy, looking at everything. So
Yes.
they immediately clock that they could be this nice match. And they speak on Brandon's personality to Eleanor, and they talk about his kind of story that he did have a long lost love. He loved somebody who like worked in his household, so it wasn't a good
Yeah.
match because she was like a servant, and his parents were upset, so they sent her away. Then he went to the war, but he never stopped looking for her. And then when he ultimately returned and went to find her, she was dying in a poorhouse.
Yeah.
And so,
Brandon's story is kind of wild in the
yes, and
movie,
it gets
really.
even crazier. So we learn that like he's this man who loves, he's not this big status, classist person.
No,
So
he's a very good man, a very
yes.
honorable man.
Yes. Yeah, and he is fully aware that it would be, that Marianne is not interested, and so he, very
Yeah, he is.
self-deprecating when it comes to talks of her when Fudge is kind of pushing him towards that. Yes, we're gonna just keep calling them their Harry Potter
We
character
are.
names.
We are.
Uh,
Those two, yeah.
yes. And he very much is like, oh no, she there's no way she's interested in me. So just like leave it alone. But when they do spend time together, he's very attentive. They're playing games like
Oh, yeah.
outside, and he's making sure he hands her like the ball so she can have
Yeah.
another turn, and just kind of looking out for her and those kinds of things. Very complimentary to her, but very respectful.
He's got this very, I mean, it's Alan Rickman, isn't
Yeah.
it? So he brings this anyway, but he has this very kind of regal energy where
Yes.
everything is it's very upright, but kind of pleasant. I mean, this
Yes, and it's
maybe
very
pleasant's
soft-spoken.
unusual, very soft spoken, typically Alan Rickman, obviously, with the natural way he spoke.
Yes.
But rather interestingly, he's obviously in no way cunningly villainous or anything like that,
No,
which
it's
obviously
nice to
Alan
see him
Rickman was best
sweet and
known for.
romantic. Yeah, he comes off very handsome and charming
He
and
really does.
yeah, so it's
He
very kind
really
of
does.
surprising to see him in a role like this, and he does a really great job. You are immediately endeared to him and just want Marianne to be like, "He's a good
Yeah.
guy, like, just
You
be nice to him."
he's the stable figure,
Yeah.
really, isn't he? In Marianne's romantic entanglements, he is the
Yes.
real stable, steady, good. This will be such a good, simple but pleasant life
Yes. And you
with
will be attended
Brandon.
to, he will take care of you kind of thing.
Yes.
But that's doesn't interest her,
Or
he's boring and he's old, so that's not,
exactly.
yeah, because I think there's conversations with Eleanor and her, and she's, like, aware that Colonel Brandon likes her, and,
Yeah. Even Eleanor's like, he's all right, this dude. Come on.
yes, she talks about she's like, "Did you hear him talking about his bad shoulder and, like, his bad leg?" And, like
I talk about my bad
yeah,
leg and my
his
bad
arthritic
shoulder.
shoulder, and she's like, "I think he just said he had a pain, like, he didn't say it was any arthritis or anything like that," kind of thing. So Eleanor's trying to, like, talk it back and, like, to, Marianne's exaggerations of his old man
Yes.
ailments. Um, so
He's not that
yeah.
old. He's not even that old, is
No,
he, at this
no.
point? But yeah, I mean, Marianne could have that, or she could have someone else who
Yes.
breezes into the movie
Yes, so she does
and
have this penchant for
or
walking out in the rain. She'll go walking, and they tell
yeah,
her, "It's gonna rain, Marianne." "No, it's not." And then sure enough, it starts raining. So she
this
drags the
causes a
youngest
serious issue
sister.
later on.
Yes. She drags the littlest sister out into the to for a walk, and it starts raining, and they're caught in this storm, And as they're kind of running down this hill, Marianne falls and hurts her ankle. And she sends the sister to run for help, and just then a handsome man on a steed rides up
Oh, yes.
and checks her ankle and picks her up and carries her back to the house in the rain, this handsome man. And this is where we meet Willoughby, and he
Yes.
becomes the kind of main major love interest for
And I think
Marianne.
we also, at least at the beginning, obviously, before we learn certain things,
Yeah.
like Willoughby as well. I think
Yeah.
we are, endeared to him. He's a much different dynamic. Obviously,
Yeah.
he's kind of rapid and fierce and
Spontaneous and
passionate and
wild and
spontaneous.
yes, and
Yes.
very much matching Marianne's energy. When, he brings her to the house, and, he asked to come check on her the next day. The next day, Colonel Brandon shows up, brings her this really kind of put together and gorgeous bouquet. And she's just like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, thanks." And then he leaves. And then here comes Willoughby with just some wildflowers that he picked, and she's just like over the moon for
Yeah.
that. So it kind of just speaks to their differences. And, kind of all propriety has gone out the window in this situation, which then again speaks to the sense and sensibility of things that, she's running around, she's constantly alone with Willoughby, riding around in his carriage. They're being loud and laughing and,
Yeah.
being a little too touchy in these public settings. And so Eleanor kind of has to pull her aside and say, people are talking. So maybe practice some caution and some propriety when you're with Willoughby, because people are starting to say things. And, Marianne just kind of ignores
Yeah.
it. So yeah, again, another situation where we're feeling the modernity of these characters.
Yeah. And, I think after a certain point, obviously we've had much more time to sit with the Dashwoods living on the estate of
Yeah.
Fudge and the Fat Lady, and they've been out to London as well, met other people. It's where Imelda Staunton and Hugh Laurie come into the
Come in.
movie,
Yeah.
and there's also another character who comes into the movie as well, Lucy Steele,
Ah,
who is an
yes.
interesting little thorn, although thorn is an unfair word because she doesn't do anything wrong. She's just
No. She's
in
just
the
kind of
way
an
of
obstacle.
something.
Yes. She immediately wants to endear herself to Eleanor for some reason. And she says, "Oh, I've been told wonderful things about you, that you're such a good person, that you're this great person, and so I want to talk to you." And so she kind of hitches herself to her in their time together and is constantly talking to her. And then they're at this little kind of gathering with Imelda Staunton and Hugh Laurie and her mother, her little sister, and
Yeah,
Fat Lady.
everybody.
And yes, so it's just that kind of group, and they're just sitting talking. And Lucy kind of reveals something to her. She's like, can I speak to you privately? And she tells her that she's been uh secretly engaged to somebody.
Yes, for
And
like 5 years.
yes, and she brings up the name Ferrers, and she
Mm.
thinks they're talking about the younger brother. And she's
Yes,
like,
who we
"No."
meet like twice in the whole movie. He's a bit
Yes.
goofy
Yeah,
and weird.
he's yeah, he's not he doesn't look anything like a Hugh Grant. Um,
No,
a and she mistakens that she's talking about the younger brother, and she's like, "No, I've been engaged to Edward Ferrars." Because she was asked, she started it by asking about Fanny's mother, like, "Have you met her? Do you know what her
yeah,
demeanor's like?" This whole thing, and she's like, "Oh, no, I've never met her." And so then she reveals this, and obviously Eleanor is heartbroken, but she's obviously in this
yeah.
public setting, and
Doesn't
obviously
say anything.
generally
Can't
she
ever
doesn't.
say anything.
Yes, no, so she just keeps it to herself, because I think the big kind of rule of propriety is that, if there was no declaration of love, if there was no kind of
That is
clear
right, isn't it?
layout of feelings, then you have no right to really express that,
Yeah, it is
outright.
so. you're so right in saying that, because it's made a point, such a significant point of several times, and
Yeah.
has been in other movies as well. A man needs to tell a woman, I love you, I want to marry you,
Yeah.
for any sort of feelings to hold any weight.
Yeah.
The feelings can be those, but if it's not said in audible, in an audible way for somebody else to hear, none of it matters at all, and you're free to do whatever you want.
Yes, exactly. And they have really no claim on you, which plays into Marianne's
Yeah,
situation
maybe
with
it's all about
Willoughby
claim.
later. Yes, essentially, I think. Um so yeah, Eleanor kind of has to just keep this to herself, and doesn't
Yes,
tell
for a
anybody
very long
because she's
time.
keeping that secret for Lucy. And then also it's like she feels very stupid that she allowed herself to feel some type of way about Edward, and thinking maybe she
Yes,
misread the situation, that he was, engaged to somebody else, or she realizes that's probably what he was trying to tell her before they got
definitely.
interrupted. And so she's trying to be sensible about all of this,
Yeah.
and so she kind of is just holding that to herself.
You obviously feel
Ultimately,
very, very much a great level of sympathy for Eleanor at
yeah.
this point, but I think you come to really be sympathetic towards Lucy as well, who's kind of been dragged along for years at
Yes.
this point,
E
in this
exactly.
adoration of Edward that she has, that they see each other like once a year or something like that. It's
Yes,
not
exactly.
anything that is really
No.
anything at all, or can
No,
be
it was
anything
this
at all, yet
thing,
she
yeah.
keeps that within her, and just out of pure, as I say, adoration for Edward. And Edward, when he comes back into the movie, obviously, I think it's pretty clear that he wants it less and less and less with Lucy.
Yes.
So you
Yeah,
come to feel the sympathy for Lucy as well, and I like that. That's why I like
you
Lucy
don't
as a
villainize
character,
her.
because
Yeah.
they don't villainize her at all when they could quite easily villainize her.
Yeah.
They make her very, very understandable and
Yes. And
a
they
sympathetic figure.
Yes, and, I think it's kind of made clear that, like, Edward kind of made this proposal when they were very young, and so as time kind of waned on and them not really seeing each other, those feelings also waned, that it was kind of a young love, spur of the moment type situation, that brought about this engagement.
Yeah.
And then also at a party when they're in London, she does, meet up with the younger Ferrers brother, and it seems like he has been involved in trying to, like, pass messages and, like, kind of
Yes.
connect them. If you hear snoring, I have a bulldog sleeping in the room, so just ignore. But, yeah, he seems like he has been this facilitator of this relationship, but honestly, if you look at it, like, the 2 of them get on pretty well,
They
the
do.
younger brother and Lucy. So that kind of is something that will come into play a little bit later. But things kind of get very dark for Marianne in London, because before they go to London, when they're still in the cottage in the country, also just another thing that kind of is the
There's a
first
lot going
sign.
on.
Yes, yes. Also just something that speaks is the first sign that maybe Willoughby is not as wonderful as we think he is Colonel Brandon throws this picnic at his estate, and everyone's
Yes.
there, and the picnic's about to start when he gets this urgent message and he has to leave. So they
Like,
can't do the picnic
immediately. It's very,
immediately.
very
Yeah,
dynamic.
urgent. Yes. Yeah. So he runs off, he leaves, he has to go. Very urgent business he has to take care
Never
of.
see. I've not seen Alan Rickman move that quickly since he was Sheriff of Nottingham.
Exactly. So, they're all back at the cottage, and we hear Willoughby just kind of making fun of Colonel Brandon, and
Yes, we do.
Marianne kinda laughing. So that's kind of our first cue that, I don't know about this Willoughby. But,
Mm.
she ends up walking him to the gate, and he, like, makes this declaration of, "Can I see you alone tomorrow?" She's like, "We're always alone." He's like, "Well, I have something very important I want to talk to you about."
Yeah.
And it's clear that, "Oh, there's a proposal coming. This is really interesting. Okay." So that is the setup. Cut to the next day. Marianne's crying. Willoughby is just nervously like pacing. He doesn't know what to do. The rest of the family comes in because they were giving this breathing time because they thought, you know, we're
Yeah.
going to let them be alone for this proposal. And then they walk in and they see Marianne's crying. Willoughby is a mess. And they're asking him what's going on. You know, he's saying he has to leave. Where are you going? And he says, like, I can't put myself through this. And he just like storms out and leaves. And looking distraught and a mess, and Marianne's crying and she doesn't want to talk about it. And it's this kind of comedic scene where she runs to her room and she doesn't want to talk. Eleanor's trying to tell the youngest sister to make her some tea, and she's like, nobody wants to tell me anything. And so then she runs to her room, and then the mother's upset that her daughters are upset, so then she runs off crying, and then Eleanor just sits on the step and drinks some tea because everybody's losing it.
How funny is it at this point that the one who does want to talk is Eleanor, and the ones who don't are the ones who always do.
Want to talk about everything. Yes. So cut to now, Marianne is depressed. Lucy has revealed the engagement to Eleanor, and this London trip is proposed. So they go to London. Marianne's excited because she thinks, oh my gosh, I'll get to see Willoughby, because now it's been, I think, a few months that she hasn't heard from him. She's been writing him letters. He hasn't responded. So now every day at the London house, she's writing him letters and just bugging the poor servant man to is there any mail, is there any post, ringing the bell for him to come in the middle of the night with his wig all sideways and looking grumbly to take a letter. And she's just, that's all she can kind of focus on until they go to this party. Lucy meets up with the younger Ferrers brother, is talking to him, dancing with him, I guess, you know, making plans to try to connect with Edward in some form. And then, you know, as Eleanor's dancing, she sees Willoughby, and it's this big shock. And she's kind of trying to like look for Marianne to hopefully have Marianne not see him. And so kind of embarrassingly and improperly across the room, she just shouts, Willoughby. And, you know, she runs up to him and kind of tells him, why have you not spoken to me? What's going on? And he's very kind of cold to her, and then just kind of leaves. And she follows him into this other room and sees him arm in arm with this young, beautiful blonde woman. And the woman just looks back at Eleanor and Marianne, and we hear her making some comment about their poor clothes and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
I mean, at this point, we think he's just kind of unnecessarily
cruel,
forgotten about her, or there was a
prior betrothal.
Yes. Which,
because
if there was another woman to begin with, it's a bit of a similar situation to what we're dealing with Lucy and Edward.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit more understandable. What comes from it, however, comes actually from not Willoughby's mouth, does it? It comes from Colonel Brandon's mouth eventually, about how actually really
deplorable Willoughby is. Yes, and the situation he's gotten himself into, because he is kind of being backed and funded by an old relative, and so he kind of has to keep all his things in line or he's going to get cut off, kind of situation. And we ultimately do learn, the terrible thing we do learn about Willoughby is ultimately that day that Colonel Brandon had to leave, it was because the woman he loved who died had a child. And so he had that child in his care. So he would send her money and to help take care of her, and give her whatever she needed. But ultimately she kind of got a little wild and he gave her a little bit too much freedom. And ultimately someone got her pregnant and left her. And
so let's specify this a little bit more for it to not be a little bit confusing. Colonel Brandon had an illegitimate child with this servant woman he loved, or whoever it was, this improper woman that he...
I don't think it's his child.
It is. Is it not his child?
I didn't read it.
Child.
I never read it as his...
I thought the child who grew up who Willoughby wronged was Colonel Brandon's child.
I don't think it's his child. I believe
really?
it was...
Why did I think it was that?
I don't know. Maybe now I'm like, did I misunderstand? Do we need to
I
get
can I
confirmation?
can try and find,
I
because I did think that was what was the case.
I always read it as this was just the woman he loved, and he found her dying and kind of made this promise to her to care for her child.
Me I
And
think the point stands as what the point stands as,
yes,
and
yes.
the fundamentals are the same, but I will look for the
Okay.
specifics.
Okay. Yeah, so I read it as that like this child that he decides to care for, and he has been caring for her for several years. He gave her a little too much freedom. She ended up ultimately getting pregnant by somebody and abandoned, and the person who did that happened to be Willoughby. In order to avoid getting cut off from his relative, he ends up marrying this kind of rich girl to
I apologize, what did happen, the daughter was illegitimate, but not Brandon's.
Yes. Okay.
So it was his own, the woman he loved
Yes.
had this illegitimate
Legitimate
daughter
child,
with
and
somebody else, obviously.
yes, and he chose to take care for it because he loved her and she died.
Yes,
So,
correct.
yes.
Sorry about that one.
No, that's okay. No, that's okay. So yeah, so Willoughby obviously wrongs this young girl. Um, then he meets
Yes,
Marianne.
the daughter
Yes.
of Brandon's
Brandon's love.
lover,
Yes.
or love, I should say, not lover necessarily. Willoughby is the one who, yes, wrongs, sleeps with, does whatever with, and
Yes.
leaves.
And leaves her. And then he meets Marianne, and he wants to be with her, but ultimately she's of poor status, and so his rich relative will not have him, be with Marianne. So in order to kind of be able to keep his status and fortune and inheritance and all that
Yeah,
intact, he ends up marrying this rich, blonde woman. So then ultimately that's when what I had mentioned kind of comes into play, when she is just completely heartbroken, Marianne. And, Eleanor's trying to console and comfort her, because all this whole time, I think Eleanor was under the assumption that Willoughby made a clear declaration, a clear proposal, betrothal to her, because
yes,
that day that he was supposed to propose, Marianne never said what actually happened. So Eleanor
yes,
is under this assumption that he did propose. So when he does make this move and is with somebody else and all of that, Eleanor is incredibly confused. So when Marianne is crying in her arms, she's trying to get confirmation for what's really going on. She's like, "Didn't he say he loved you? Didn't he propose?" And Marianne's like, "No, he never did." And so then Eleanor
yeah.
kind of has to understand, okay, she's upset, but like,
Yes,
it wasn't
I
what she
think we
thought it
should say,
was.
no, I think we should say at this point as well that in all this story about Brandon's past that he
Yeah.
reiterates, he's the one who tells it. He also obviously states that that day that he received this urgent message was this daughter of his love
Yeah.
had been missing for
Missing.
several years,
Yeah.
and this was the first anybody had heard of her, and
Yes.
this is why this message was so urgent,
So
and this is
urgent for
why he
him
had
to
to
go.
dash off so quickly.
Yes, and so he found out, and then he found out that the man responsible was Willoughby,
Yes,
and he does ultimately, he finds, Eleanor, and he goes and talks to her because he's worried that Marianne has been caught up with Willoughby knowing this information, so he goes to find her to tell her, to have your sister be weary of him because he is not a good person, kind of thing.
yeah,
And then ultimately, I think this is before we've gotten any news on Willoughby at all, that Marion has still been sending these letters,
yeah,
and
I think so.
and and Eleanor's still under the impression that he's engaged or proposed or said, gave a declaration of love to her sister. So when Brandon comes and says these things, um, Brandon doesn't clearly state it, but he kind of implies, and just kind of once Eleanor kind of says, "I think he has proposed or he has declared feelings for her," Brandon just, still knowing how terrible Willoughby is, he still just wishes her every happiness, which is
He
just
does,
speaks to
which
his character.
of course it does. Of course it does. This is what
Yes.
I think we
And
really like about Brandon again.
yes. And he leaves it with this comment of, "I hope he proves to be worthy of her." And Eleanor is like,
Yes.
"Wait, what? What? Why would he need to prove that?" And so then they kind of go on this nice walk and talk, and he tells her the whole story of everything.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so then she knows the truth, and then all of that comes out about at the party, about him being with somebody else and all of that. Um, and yeah, so we see a clear illustration of Marianne, pouring out all of her feelings, and this is where kind of her frustration is at a height, with her having all of these feelings and Eleanor really not expressing any. Why have you not said anything about Edward? Why are you not sad that you haven't seen him? Why aren't you talking about any of this kind of thing? Um, and then ultimately Edward does show up.
He
Lucy is
does.
is sat with her, talking to her. Um, I think she's met Fanny, and Fanny loves her. But Fanny doesn't know that she's engaged to her brother.
Yeah.
So
I
oh,
I particularly liked this shot in this scene
yes.
as well, where Lucy is very much in the background at the wrong side of the door, shall we say, as the
Yes.
door opens and Edward walks through, sees Eleanor right in front of him, and
And
only has
he's
eyes for Eleanor.
yes, and he's so happy and very excited to see her, as excited as he can express, and
Yeah,
as Hugh
but
Grant and this time period. Uh,
all we are seeing is Lucy in the background staring at Edward with
yes,
adoration in her eyes. I think it's right at this point as well. We should say this movie is directed by Ang Lee, quite
Lee.
weirdly,
Yes,
um,
yeah.
who is obviously a very accomplished director. Wouldn't have thought he would have directed a Jane Austen movie, but does it
Yeah,
so very well and
yes.
makes a beautiful movie. Beautiful looking movie, really well crafted. Forgive me for missing a slight specific of a plot point earlier and having to get
Oh,
my
no, no,
head
no,
around
that's okay.
things.
First time watch, those
Um,
things happen, but,
but that's
yeah,
not
the
Ang
blocking.
Lee's fault.
Yes. No, I'm glad you pointed out the blocking of this scene. It's really well done. So yeah, he walks in. They have not seen each other in a long time. Seems very excited to see her, and she kind of has to reel back kind of anything that
Mm,
he might say, knowing
yeah,
that Lucy's in the room and he hasn't seen her. So he's kind of about to express uh this happiness to see her, and then she kind of says, "Oh, I assume you know Miss Lucy Steele over here," and it's also kind of this dig at him that, like,
yeah. Come
yes,
on,
I
you
know you
do.
know her, yeah, kind of thing. And he turns and he sees her, and he's just like doesn't know what to make of it. He doesn't know what to
You,
do with himself. She's
but
looking at him with these doe eyes, all
yeah,
excited, and
you
he's
know what
just
he
very
doesn't do though,
confused. Yeah.
which I was quite happy with. He doesn't then go, well, it's Lucy. And typically Hugh Grant kind of stuttering and
Yeah.
bawling over his words and that. He just goes, he puts him, he keeps himself put together quite strangely.
Yeah.
And he goes, yes, of course, Miss Steele, how are you?
Yeah.
Um, well, I suppose your family, everything, yes, and there is this bit of tension that you
Yeah.
see, isn't there? There is, you get it, but I quite liked the fact that Hugh Grant didn't resort to a stereotype of himself in
Yes,
that
he
point.
does keep it fairly composed, and so it kind of ultimately kills any kind of excitement or dream that it is to see Eleanor after all this time, because
Yeah,
Lucy is there looming. So once they're kind of having seen each other again, him and Eleanor, but also him and Lucy for the first time in a long time, the next time Lucy is with his sister, and and Fanny is just very much like, "Oh my gosh, you're wonderful. You're so great. You'll make a great wife for anybody." And she's like, "Well, I'm happy you said that, because I there is somebody I have my eye on." And Fanny's like, "Ooh, I can keep a secret,
mm,
tell me." And she whispers it in her ear, and Fanny immediately just starts beating her ass.
I mean, she does. She really just does bail on
Yes.
her
She
at this
calls her a
point.
snake, like she's trying to sneak in here and get her brother, and how dare you, all of these things. And so it's presumed that once the mother finds out that this has happened, she cuts off Edward and
Yes.
has them call off this engagement. Um and I think he was kind of ready to call it off anyway, so they kind of make peace with that whole situation. And now he's cut off.
Yeah.
And uh,
I think
uh
it's important to jump back to Marianne as well at this point,
yes. Yeah. Oh
because she's
yes.
obviously, yes, when it is all revealed, Willoughby's horribleness and all that kind of stuff, she becomes inconsolable, obviously, as she
Yeah.
only really ever had proper eyes for Willoughby,
Yeah.
understands that he's obviously terrible, does all this walk out in the middle of the night in the rain situation again.
Yeah. He does write her a very cold letter, kind of
He does.
telling her that it's over, that like maybe that it was kind of all in her head, that he had these feelings,
Yeah.
kind of a best regards.
It's really, really nasty.
Yeah.
But she makes herself kind of deathly ill and
Yeah.
is only saved, if I'm remembering rightly, again, saved by Brandon.
Yes.
Outside, he goes in this storming, horrible rain and brings her back as
Yes,
this kind of quiet hero figure.
Yes, they've returned from London. She's still very depressed. She just wants to go walking. Eleanor tells her it's gonna rain. She's like, "Oh no, it's not. I'm
Yeah.
just gonna stay in the yard." So
It's
Eleanor's
tough for
watching
a
her
little
from the
bit as
window.
well at this
Yes.
point.
Yes. Eleanor's watching her through the window, make sure she stays in the yard. But then Imelda Staunton is very much like, "Look at my new baby, look at my baby." And so
Yeah.
as she's kind of Eleanor's looking at the baby, she turns back to the window, and Marianne is gone. So she's gone wandering off, because earlier in the film, Imelda Staunton had talked about how Willoughby, once it is revealed that he is engaged, he married this little woman, their house is just over this hill.
That's right.
And you can see it from Imelda Staunton's house, and she had mentioned that earlier on, this estate that he was going to inherit. And so she walks to that hill so that she can see Willoughby's house, or estate. And so that's why she kind of goes so far out. And ultimately it starts to rain, and she's lost. No one's seen her for a few hours. So Brandon goes out looking for her, and he brings her back soaking wet, out in the rain for hours, and she's very ill. And
I mean, it looks pretty serious for a time as well. I'd like to point out it looks like I was half expecting, because I obviously didn't know the story. I thought it might end really upsettingly.
Yeah, with her
really
dying.
depressingly.
Yes, because the doctor's saying he doesn't know, like it's very touch and go kind of thing. They call their mother to come down, and all of this kind of situation. So it gets very dire. Yes, she does kind of have this turnaround, and she's asking for Colonel Brandon to thank him.
She is.
Yes, so he comes in.
This is very key.
To see him. Yes, yeah.
It has finally clocked with Kate Winslet that Brandon is the one who cares.
Is incredibly cares and is devoted to her and will do anything for her and is incredibly attentive to her.
Yes. It takes her nearly dying for
her to realize that. Yes.
Which is extreme. But sometimes you need that extreme.
Yes.
And obviously we've reached a bit of a culmination with kind of Edward and Eleanor and Lucy and that kind of trio.
Yes. Yeah.
But this trio over here of Marianne, Brandon, and Willoughby, who doesn't no longer exist. He can, he's away and off, not doing anything of any use. But I love that Brandon is still very much kind of devoted at this point. He sees so strongly how much she is passionate for Willoughby, even though he's horrible. He's done horrible things to both of them.
Yes.
Yet he's still
there.
showing this devotion for Marianne.
Yes. Even though she hasn't really shown much of any reciprocation to his feelings either.
No.
And
now
he
that
shows
she
his character.
kind of begins to, because she begins to be thankful for him, I think we realise that obviously there's not much left to go in the movie.
Well, we did skip a decent chunk of something, which also
very long episode today.
I know, because there's so many like interesting plot points to kind of go over and gush about. Another just big moment that speaks to Brandon's character, and also is like my favorite scene with Marianne and Eleanor, when we're still in London, and all kind of is revealed. And that blocking scene where Edward walks in and Lucy's there. Marianne walks in and she's very excited to see Edward and talking to him. Oh, where have you been? We haven't seen you. Why haven't you come around? And she knows nothing about this Lucy situation.
Nothing at all.
And aren't you so happy to see Eleanor, and saying all of these things and kind of really making these big connections between him and Eleanor in front of Lucy? And Eleanor's kind of trying to rein it back a little bit. And it's just very awkward. So then ultimately it is revealed, this whole engagement situation, to Marianne. Because the fat lady, she finds out this gossip and brings it up. And so this is the first Marianne has heard of it. And she's upset that Eleanor never told her. And she's like, why have you not said anything? Why didn't you tell me? And Eleanor kind of has her big emotional outburst, kind of talking about, you know, you were the one completely heartbroken. What good would it have been for me to tell you about my heartbreak? Because I have been dying and I've had to hold on to this and keep it to myself this whole time. So, you know, I have enough heartbreak in me that I could have shared with you that would have satisfied your desire to know what's going on with me. But I didn't feel like I needed to say anything.
It's that typical, what they always say, British style of acting from Emma Thompson of hold it in, explode.
Yes. And so she does have this big explosion, you know, revealing her heartbreak and telling you know, Marianne, that I don't have the luxury to just tell you that my heart has been breaking, that I've been holding on to this whole time by myself, and this whole kind of thing. And yeah, so it's a really great scene, and Marianne kind of steps back and kind of finally understands her sister's perspective as to why she constantly kind of holds things in and feels this genuine hurt and heartbreak for her sister, as her sister felt for her, that her sister's going through this. And so they kind of, even though it's a bit of like this argument of you don't reveal enough, and you know, you reveal too much, and this is why I don't reveal that much. And you know, once she kind of sits with Marianne, realizes this is what my sister's going through. Oh shoot. They kind of come together. And then we get this other great scene as well with Colonel Brandon, who explains, kind of gives us a great kind of exposition dump. He explains that Willoughby did have every intention of proposing to Marianne that day.
Yes.
But once the rich relative of his found out like his plans, that he was going to, you know, propose to this lower class woman, and I think she did find out about the other things with the young girl, you know, she forbade him, you know, from marrying Marianne. So he came there to tell her that he couldn't marry her and all of that. But he did love Marianne and he did want to marry her. So all of that was genuine despite his other deplorable behavior. And Brandon also, you know, sets up, you know, it's revealed that Edward, you know, did lose everything, but I think the thought is that he was still going to marry Lucy, that Lucy was going to stay with him.
That's right.
And so Colonel Brandon gives this offer of this parish and this land that he has, and he's offering it to Edward. And even though it's not going to be with her, and she's still assuming it's going to be with Lucy, she goes to Eleanor, and tells him, you know, Colonel, I'm here to give you this offer from Colonel Brandon. He's offered you this land and this and that for you and Lucy. And just the biggest of persons to be able to do this, to tell this man that you love and deliver this news, and Colonel Brandon to just be this kind man to like give this offer as well. And I think this is the scene where she does give that line where he's so taken aback that she doesn't hate him or she's not mean or cold to him, that that she's very just like, you don't understand kindness from people because your family is so terrible. Basically was what she tells him.
Which is true.
Yes, because he fully expects her to just be hating him, but she's still very kind to him because she loves him. And so ultimately it is revealed that Lucy did marry a Ferrers, but she ended up marrying the younger brother, who the mother did kind of instate as the one who's going to inherit everything. As
and it's
Edward
this very
cut off.
It's this very annoyingly
confusing reveal.
I suppose confusing is a word you could use. I'd like to just shout, just say what you mean.
Yes, well, it's their servant. It's their like groundskeeper guy who comes in with some wood, and he's just come from town, and he's telling them that, he ran into Lucy Ferrers, and
Lucy
she offered
Lucy,
and she asked about all
Mrs. Ferrers,
Yes, and she offered you guys some cake, and she was asking about you all, and says she would love to see you, and this and this and that. And so we're under this assumption that, and he doesn't say which Ferrers, so we're just under this assumption that she did in fact marry Edward. So then Edward shows up. Eleanor is just kind of, asks him, "Oh, how is Mrs. Ferrers?" And he's like, "Oh, my mother, she's fine." Like, no, Mrs. Lucy Ferrers. Yes. And so she's like, "No, Mrs. Lucy Ferrers. Oh, no, she married my brother. Yes. I came here."
My brother's wife. What? Your brother's wife? Yay!
Yes.
That's basically how we
and just the breakdown she has when she hears this, like, it's so beautiful. Like, she has no words, she doesn't know what to say. And we kind of get this really cute description of this proposal happening because the family leaves, and the youngest sister's in the treehouse calling down, he's getting down on one knee, and that kind of thing. So it's really cute that we just verbalize this proposal through the family watching outside. And then we end with a wedding, and we assume it's Edward and Eleanor's wedding. But whose wedding is it, Morgan?
It isn't Edward and Eleanor's wedding. Edward and Eleanor walk out of this church together, arm in arm. They do.
Yes.
But it's Marianne and Brandon's wedding.
Yes.
They're the ones actually getting married. It might have been a double wedding. I don't know. It's not actually that clear.
So we have to maybe they already got married.
But yes. But what a lovely, lovely ending it is. To realize, Eleanor and Edward, they are true. That is a real. I think that's the better romance of the two of them. That's the better love story of the two of them.
Yes.
Marianne and Brandon is more like Marianne realizing.
This last minute revelation.
It's Marianne realizing what love should be and what love shouldn't be, and realizing that love should be someone like Brandon, and Brandon obviously having so much affection for her. I think that's kind of less equal almost than Edward and Eleanor is. So that's why I kind of prefer Edward and Eleanor.
Yes.
But it's a really nice two couples. I like that these are our two couples at the end, and I like that the whole story wraps up in just this really lovely way of pleasantness and happiness and real solidity for all these characters, I suppose. The bad characters get to feel bad about themselves and go off and aren't thought of, and everybody that we do care about, everybody that we have been endeared to, are in this wedding, celebrating and being happy for this extended family that's now been crafted.
Yes. So very beautiful ending. And I mean, I think we did not tell that story very well. We kind of just meandered around.
We
That's
never
what
do.
we do. I know. I mean, people come into podcasts like these with notes and bullet points and go through it like that. I kind of like our
It's all about the feelings.
fly off the cuff discussion over here at It's a Wonderful Podcast.
The point is, it's all about the feelings and how those feelings change throughout the movie. And Sense and Sensibility was so great. I am very conscious it's been a very long episode today. I know that, but that is in tandem with how great a movie this is, how great a story this is, and how much time this is worth talking about and getting into, because there is so much here to thoroughly enjoy and ultimately feel good about as well. There's, you're left with such a heartwarming scene that what a great feel good movie it ends up being.
And a journey that we go on to get to like a really beautiful destination.
Pride and Prejudice next week is going to have to do something that, okay, it's Pride and Prejudice. I expect it will do something pretty special, to be honest with you. If not from specifically a movie standpoint, from a story standpoint, because, okay, I know the basics, but I don't know the details.
Okay. So you never saw the famous miniseries?
No, I never saw the famous miniseries, the Colin Firth, Mr. Darcy one. No.
Okay. I might watch that for some homework. We'll see.
But I'm also maybe because I also think that the consensus is that maybe the better version is the miniseries and not the movie, even though the movie is very loved as well.
Yes, because I've never seen it either, but I know how beloved that Colin Firth version is. So I definitely might make an effort to check that out, to kind of do a little bit of compare and contrast, as I did with the Emma episode. So
yes, I say all that to say it's going to have to do something that I expect it will do, but it really is going to have to do something special to hold up to this Sense and Sensibility. I think, in my mind. And as I said, I think this is the one, certainly the one so far, that I had this idea of, after doing this series, treating myself to my favorite story in novel form of this series. Actually, I've never read anything Jane Austen. I've never owned anything by Jane Austen, and I was going to do, I was going to go to whatever bookshop and get a copy of whatever my favorite ends up being. I'd be stunned if it's not Sense and Sensibility at this point. I would. Even though it's Pride and Prejudice and that name comes with so much, I'd be stunned if it's not Sense and Sensibility. But we've got that to come next week, of course, as the Jane Austen on Film series wraps up. Extra specially long episode today. My goodness me.
Yes.
What a time it has been. But this is not the only show you can find on the It's a Wonderful Podcast feed. The main show, It's a Wonderful Podcast, is there celebrating old movies every single week, of course. You can find this on all major podcast platforms, of course, the It's a Wonderful Podcast feed. For Morgan Hasn't Seen and the main show, wherever you are listening. If you are, of course, watching today, as we said before, subscribe, ding the notification bell on the It's a Wonderful Podcast YouTube channel for all the fun stuff we have here, including Morgan Hasn't Seen TV, that alternates between two shows every other Monday. That's always very exciting. There are, if you want to support us on Patreon, as we said before, with the patrons and all that fun stuff, there are links in the description to do that. There's also a donation link in the description. We would love you forever and ever and ever. Or, of course, you can also just find us on social media, on the app formerly known as Twitter at It's a Wonderful One, on Blue Sky at It's a Wonderful One. Find me on the app formerly known as Twitter at The Purple Dawn, with a 3 instead of the E in there, because, Jeannine,
3 is a magic number.
on Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky at The Purple Dawn. All your sensibility is where.
You can find me at Jeannine _ on Twitter, Jeannine on Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. If you want to get any merch for any of our shows, just check the description for the link or search G9 Design on tpublic.com. And if you want to purchase any of my art in print form, you can find that at my Big Cartel shop, g9design.bigcartel.com.
Well, there we go. There is, of course, certainly only one thing left to do, Jeannine, and in your best Hugh Grant, please.
Oh my gosh. What? I was not expecting that.
All right, your best Alan Rickman, then.
That is even worse. Oh my God. 3, 2, 1.
I'm trying to figure out whether that was Alan Rickman or George Sanders. Bye.